I've spent my whole life leaving. It's the one thing I'm truly good at, being gone before anyone notices I was there already, halfway down the road while the door still swings. So when I tell you that I stayed in the end, that a storm blew me into the wrong tent, and a king wouldn't let me go, and I, for the first and only time, stayed, you have to understand what an impossible thing that was and how hard he had to work to make it happen. Let me start with the leaving, because it's the heart of me. My name is Senna, and I was a wanderer, a traveling trader, a peddler of small goods, a woman of the roads. I went from town to town and market to market with a pack on my back, selling ribbons and needles and little things people need, and I never stayed anywhere longer than the selling took, and I belonged to no place and no one. That was by design. That was the whole architecture of my life, built on purpose, brick by careful brick. Because once when I was small, I had belonged somewhere. There was a home, a cottage, a hearth, a family of sorts. I don't remember it clearly. I was very young, but I remember enough that I lived there, that it was mine, that I was a child who belonged to a place. And then, for reasons a child never fully learns, poverty, hardship, a family that couldn't or wouldn't keep one more mouth, I was given up, turned out, sent away, abandoned in the plainest word at an age too young to understand anything except the one thing a child in that situation understands all the way down to the bone. I was not worth keeping. I was the thing the people who were supposed to keep me decided to let go. I carried one thing away from that home. A key, a small worn brass key, the key to the cottage door. I don't know how I came to have it. Perhaps I took it a child clutching the one solid piece of the home she was losing. And I have carried it on every road since, for all the years of my wandering, a brass key to a door I can never go back through, to a home that gave me up the only proof I ever had that I once belonged to a place. I keep it on a cord around my neck. I have never once been able to throw it away, and I have never once been able to use it, because the door it opens is gone to me forever. And that, I suppose, is the truest thing about my whole life. Because here is what being given up teaches a child, the lesson that organized everything. I became that to stay is to be at the mercy of other people's keeping. That if you belong to a place, a person, a home, then those people hold the power to unkeep you, to decide one day that you're the mouth too many, the thing not worth keeping, and to turn you out. And the only way to make sure that never happens to you again is to never stay, to never belong, to be the one who leaves first, always, before anyone can leave you. If you're already gone, you can't be abandoned. If you never put down roots, no one can tear them up. So I became a leaver. I traveled. I stayed nowhere. I let no one hold me, kept no one close, was always already halfway out the door. And in 20 years of it, I had never once been left, because I had never once stayed long enough to be. It was a lonely way to live, but it was safe, and safe was the only thing I'd ever learned to want. I'd had chances to stay over the years. That's the part people don't understand. It wasn't that no one ever offered me a place, a kind innkeeper who wanted a daughter, a widower who wanted a wife, a village that would have taken me in. It was that every time someone offered me roots, I felt the old terror rise like floodwater, and I was gone by morning. Sometimes without even a goodbye, because a goodbye is a thing you owe people you stayed long enough to matter to, and I made very sure never to matter to anyone. I'd watch other people's lives from the road, their homes, their families, their belonging, the way you watch a fire from out in the cold, wanting the warmth, and knowing the warmth was not for you, knowing that if you reached for it, you'd only be reminded again that you were the one who got left out in the dark. So I kept walking. I told myself the road was freedom, and it was. But freedom and loneliness, I'd learned, can be very hard to tell apart, especially at night, especially in the cold. That was me the night of the storm, a leaver on the road with a brass key to a lost home around her neck, belonging nowhere, needing no one, perfectly, carefully, deliberately, alone. And then the sky tried to kill me. It came up fast the way the worst storms do, a wall of black cloud over the hills, and then wind that knocked me sideways, and then rain like thrown stones. And then it was full dark, and I was lost off the road, blind, soaked through and cold in the deep, dangerous way that kills wanderers every year. I'd been caught in storms before. This was not like those. This was a killing storm, a once-in-a-generation storm, the kind the old people warn about, and I knew stumbling through it that I was in real trouble, that if I didn't find shelter, I would die in the open that night. One more nameless traveler the spring thaw uncovers, and there was a bitter joke in it, that I felt even then that the woman who'd spent her whole life making sure she belonged to no one would die exactly as she'd lived, alone in the dark, with no one to come looking, no one to even know her name. I had built a life with no one in it. And on the night I might die, there was no one in it. And then, through the screaming dark, I saw light. Many lights, the glow of fires and lanterns through canvas, a great encampment, a sea of tents in the storm. I didn't know whose. I didn't care. I cared only that tents meant shelter, and shelter meant living through the night. I staggered toward the nearest one. The closest glow fumbled through a heavy flap and fell inside out of the killing wind into warmth and light, gasping, soaked, half-frozen alive. And then I looked up and realized with a sinking horror that I had picked very much the wrong tent. It was no common soldier's tent. It was vast and richly furnished, warm with braziers hung with banners I didn't recognize, but instantly understood to be important. And at its center, risen from a table spread with maps staring at the drowned stranger who'd just fallen through his door, was a man. A big man, dark, powerful, with the bearing of someone the whole world answers to, and gray eyes that missed nothing, and even soaked and freezing and half dead. I felt it the instant his gaze landed on me. This was no captain, no lord. This was the man the whole encampment belonged to, the Alpha King. For one frozen heartbeat, we simply stared at each other, the king at his maps and the wild, storm-soaked woman who'd fallen out of the dark into his sanctuary. I was acutely, horribly aware of how it must look, a stranger dripping and disheveled, materializing uninvited in the private tent of an Alpha King, in the dead of a storm when kings have died of exactly such intrusions. I saw his hand move toward the blade at his hip. I saw the wariness flash across his face, threat assassin scent thing, and I knew in that instant that I had blundered into a situation that could end very badly for a nobody trader, that men have been cut down for less than appearing unannounced in a king's tent at night. I had taken shelter from a killing storm in the wrong tent. I had fallen drowned and trespassing into the private tent of an Alpha King. And as I scrambled to get up, to stammer an apology to flee, because fleeing is what I do. Fleeing is always what I do. The bond hit me like a second storm. It came up through the cold and the fear and the exhaustion undeniable, a wrenching deep in my chest, my whole half-frozen self lurching toward the dark man across the tent. And I saw it hit him in the same instant. Saw the wariness on his face break apart and reassemble into something stunned and certain, saw his hand fall away from his blade as the bond roared up between us across the maps and the firelight. And the king crossed the tent in 3 strides, and his hand closed around my wrist, warm, steadying sure, and he said the words that would end the only life I'd ever known. "You're not leaving. Not into that. You'll be dead before you reach the trees." I tried to leave anyway. Of course I did. It's what I do. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty," I gasped, soaked and shaking, already pulling toward the flap. "Wrong tent. I didn't know. I'll go. I'll find somewhere else. The soldiers' tents. Anywhere. I won't trouble you." Because a trespassing stranger in an Alpha King's private tent is in danger of far worse than a storm. And because every instinct I had was screaming, the only thing it ever screams, get out, get gone, leave before this becomes something. You'll go nowhere. The king's grip on my wrist was firm, but not cruel, and his gray eyes were fixed on my face with an intensity that had nothing to do with a trespasser and everything to do with the thing that had just slammed through both of us. "Listen to me. That storm out there is killing men tonight, strong wolves in their own camp caught between tents. You're half frozen already, and you don't know this ground. If you walk back out into that, you will die. I'm not going to let that happen. So you're staying in here by the fire until the storm breaks. That's not a request, and it's not about my tent. It's about you not freezing to death 50 feet from a brazier because you're too proud or too frightened to accept shelter. His jaw tightened. Now sit down before you fall down. I sat down, partly because my legs were giving out and partly because there was something in his voice under the command "under the king" that I wasn't used to and didn't know how to refuse someone refusing to let me come to harm. People had let me go my whole life. No one had ever that I could remember planted himself between me and dying and said, "I won't let that happen." He got me out of the worst of the wet, wrapped me in a fur from his own cot, put a hot drink in my hands, built up the brazier. He did it briskly, practically. A man used to taking care of those under his roof, and his roof that night, by the accident of a storm, included me. And slowly the killing cold left my bones and the shaking stopped, and I came back to myself enough to take stock of where the storm had thrown me into the private tent of an Alpha King for a whole long night, with the wind screaming and no way out and a bond humming between us like a plucked string. What struck me in those first hours was how unused to it I was being cared for. I kept flinching from his kindness, reaching to do things myself, to need nothing, to take up no space, because needing things from people is how you end up owing them, and owing people is how you end up at their mercy. And I had spent 20 years making sure I never owed anyone a thing. When he draped the fur over my shoulders, I nearly shrugged it off out of pure reflex. When he handed me the drink, I almost refused it. He noticed those gray eyes, noticed everything, and he didn't comment. Just kept quietly doing the next kind thing and the next, until my body at least gave in and let itself be warmed, even while my mind stood guard at the door. I had been wet and cold and alone so many nights of my life with no one to build up a fire for me, that being on the receiving end of even this much care felt almost unbearable, like a language I'd never learned. Like a warmth so unfamiliar, it was nearly a kind of pain. His name was Caspian. He told me that sometime in the first hour after the suspicion had faded, and there had been suspicion at first. A strange woman falling into a king's tent at night is a thing kings have learned to fear, and I saw him weigh whether I was an assassin, a thief, a sent thing, before the simple, drowned reality of me settled it. I was nobody, a traitor caught in a storm. And once he believed that the wariness gave way to something else, and we did the only thing two people trapped together by a storm can do. We talked through the long night while the world tried to tear itself apart outside. And the strangest thing emerged, the thing that made that night different from every night of my leaving life. We were opposites, perfect, exact opposites, and we both felt it. Because I was all freedom and no roots, a woman who belonged nowhere answered, to no one owed nothing, could pick up and leave any place on earth at a moment's notice, and frequently did. And Caspian was the precise reverse, all roots and no freedom. He was an Alpha King bound to his people, his crown, his duty by 10,000 ties, a man who had never in his entire life gotten to choose anything for himself, his path chosen for him at birth, his burdens inherited, his everyday spoken for by the needs of others, the weight of a whole people on his shoulders, no corner of his life that was his own. He was traveling that night with his whole host to a great gathering of the packs, a summit more duty, and he had stepped into his tent for 1 hour of solitude with the weight of it all, and a storm had blown a free woman through his door. We talked about it in the deep of the night, the way you talk about true things only to strangers you'll never see again, except neither of us quite believed by then that we'd never see each other again. He told me what it was to be an Alpha King, that he had been raised from birth, knowing his life was not his own, that every choice where he'd live, who he'd ally with, what he'd do with every hour was made by the needs of the crown and the pack, that he had never once in 30 years done a single thing simply because he wanted to. I have a whole kingdom, he said, and not 1 acre of myself. And I told him what it was to be free, and found telling him that I couldn't quite make the freedom sound like the gift I'd always insisted it was. I can go anywhere, I said, and belong nowhere. No one chooses my life for me, but no one chooses me either. We sat with that, the two of us in the firelight, the man with too much belonging and no freedom, and the woman with too much freedom and no belonging, each looking at the other like a person holding the exact thing they'd been starving for. He envied that I could leave. I envied that he had somewhere worth staying. And somewhere in the middle of that long, honest night, the envy started dangerously to turn into something warmer. You can just go, he said somewhere in the deep of the night, and there was something in it almost like wonder, almost like hunger. Anywhere. Tomorrow. You answer to no one. You belong to no place, so no place can hold you. Do you have any idea what that— He stopped and shook his head. I have never once in my life been able to simply leave. I envy it more than I can say. And I looked at this king with his whole world on his shoulders, this man so rooted he'd never been free, and I felt the thing. I never let myself feel. The pull, the warmth, the dangerous beginning of wanting to stay, and every alarm I'd built over 20 years started to ring because exactly this, the wanting to stay, is the thing I always leave before it can take hold. I sat closer to the tent flap than I needed to. I kept my pack within reach. I did not take off my boots. The lever's habits, the bolt-ready posture of a woman who has never once unpacked all the way, because unpacking all the way is for people who stay. And I was not, had never been, could never afford to be a person who stays. And around my neck, under the borrowed fur, the brass key to my lost home lay cold against my skin, the way it always did, reminding me of the only lesson I'd ever truly learned. It was the key that undid me in the end. He saw it. Deep in the night, the storm still raging, the braziers low, the two of us wrapped in the strange, honest closeness that a storm and a long dark and a humming bond will build. Between strangers, the fur slipped from my shoulder, and the brass key swung free on its cord, catching the firelight, and Caspian's sharp eyes found it. That's an old key, he said, too old and too worn to open anything you'd be carrying goods in. And you hold yourself like a woman who owns nothing she couldn't drop and walk away from in a heartbeat, but you've kept that, carried it. It matters. He looked at me, those gray eyes far too seeing. Why does it open? And I told him. I don't know why I had never told anyone in 20 years. It was the most private thing I owned, the wound at the center of me, but there is something about a storm and a long dark, and a man who'd refuse to let you die, and a bond humming in your chest that pulls the truth up out of you whether you mean it or not. So I told the Alpha King, the thing I'd never told a living soul. A door I can never go through again, I said quietly. It's the key to the house I was born in, the home I belonged to when I was small before they gave me up. His face changed, but he said nothing and let me go on. I don't remember much. I was very young. But I had a home and a family, and I belonged there, and then I wasn't worth keeping, I suppose one mouth too many hard times, and they gave me away, turned me out. And I took the key, a child grabbing the one solid piece of the thing she was losing. I closed my hand around it. I've carried it ever since, on every road for 20 years, the key to a home that decided I wasn't worth keeping. My voice was steadier than I felt. And do you know what it taught me? It taught me never to stay anywhere again. Because if you belong to a place, to people, then they have the power to unkeep you, to decide you're the thing not worth holding on to, and turn you out the way I was turned out. So I never stay. I never belong. I leave first always before anyone can leave me, because if you're already gone, you can't be abandoned. I've never been left Caspian in 20 years, because I've never once stayed long enough to be. I almost laughed. I'm very good at leaving. It's the only thing I've ever been good at. It's kept me safe my whole life. I turned the key over in my fingers the way I'd done 10,000 times on 10,000 dark roads. The strange thing is, I can't even remember their faces, the people who gave me up. I was too young, so I don't even have anyone to be angry at, just a key and a feeling, the feeling of being set down somewhere and watching the people who were supposed to keep you walk away and not look back. That's the whole of my inheritance. A brass key and that one feeling. I looked at him. Everyone thinks the road is freedom, and it is. But I didn't choose the road because I love being free, Caspian. I chose it because the road can't give you up. You can't be abandoned by a place you never stayed. I've been running from that feeling my whole life, and the running just looks like freedom from the outside. It's the prettiest cage there is. I made it myself, and I've lived in it for 20 years, and until tonight, I'd never once met anyone who made me wish the door of it would open. The tent was quiet but for the storm, and Caspian looked at me for a long moment, the rooted king and the woman who could not let herself be rooted. And when he spoke, his voice was low and certain, and it landed the words I had spent my whole life running from. "I don't want to let you leave," he said. "And I don't mean the storm, though the storm is real. I mean after. When it breaks and the sun comes up, and you could shoulder your pack and walk out of my life forever, and I'd never find you again on all the roads in the world." He leaned toward me, the firelight in his eyes. "A storm blew you into my tent tonight, Senna, and the moment you fell through that flap, I knew what you were to me, what the bond has been screaming since your wrist was in my hand. You're mine, the moon's own, and I have never once in my life wanted a single thing for myself. Everything I have was chosen for me, owed inherited, never picked, and now for the first time, my own heart has reached out and picked something. Picked you, the free woman the storm brought to my door, and I don't want to let you go. I want you to stay, not as a prisoner of the storm, as the one thing I ever chose. I want you to stay." It should have been the most beautiful thing anyone had ever said to me, and it was. And it was also the most terrifying, and the two feelings hit me at exactly the same instant and tore me down the middle. Because I had wanted my whole life for one person, just one to look at me and say, "I choose you, I want you stay." And I had spent my whole life making absolutely certain no one ever got the chance to, because the wanting was bound up so tight with the terror that I couldn't feel one without the other. He said stay, and one half of me lit up like the dawn, and the other half, the older, stronger half, the half that had kept me alive for 20 years, slammed down like a portcullis and screamed, "Run!" Because stay meant belong, and belong meant be at his mercy, and be at his mercy meant one day be turned out as the thing not worth keeping. And I had survived that exactly once and only by swearing I would die before I survived it twice. And there it was, the thing I had spent 20 years and 10,000 miles of road making sure no one would ever say to me, "Stay." The most terrifying word in any language to a woman who only knows how to leave. The storm was breaking. I could hear it, the wind dropping the rain, easing the killing dark, starting to thin toward a gray dawn. Soon it would be over. Soon the door would be open, and the road would be clear, and every instinct I had, every brick of the careful, safe, lonely life I'd built would scream the only thing it had ever screamed: leave. Leave now, leave first, leave before this becomes a thing you could lose. Leave before he can decide you're not worth keeping and turn you out the way they turned you out. A king had just told me he wouldn't let me leave. And I was a woman who had never in her whole life learned how to stay. I knew lying there in the dying storm exactly what I was going to do when the sun came up. The same thing I always did. The only thing I knew how to do. I was going to run. I left at first light before he woke. The storm had blown itself out, and the world was gray and dripping and still. And Caspian slept, a king who carried so much that exhaustion took him hard. Once it took him at all, and I lay in the borrowed fur and watched the tent flap pale toward dawn, and I felt the pull to stay, the warmth, the impossible wanting, and it terrified me more than the killing storm ever had, because the storm could only kill my body. This could kill the thing that had kept me alive for 20 years, my certainty that I was safe as long as I never stayed. So I did what I do. I gathered my pack quiet as breathing I'd never unpacked, never taken off my boots, the lever always ready, and I slipped out of the Alpha King's tent into the gray, wet dawn, and I took to the road and I left. I told myself it was kindness. He was a king. I was a traitor. What future was there really in a bond between a man rooted to a throne and a woman who belonged nowhere? I told myself I was sparing us both. I told myself all the reasonable things. But underneath the reasonable things was the only true thing, the thing that had driven every leaving of my whole life. Leave before you can be left. He'd said stay. He'd said mine. He'd offered me belonging, a home, a place, roots, and belonging was the one thing I could not survive. Because to belong is to hand someone the power to unkeep you. And I had been unkept, once turned out as the thing not worth holding, and I would die before I let myself be that vulnerable again. Better to leave the good thing myself now on my own terms with the wanting still sweet and unspoiled than to stay and let it become precious, and then one day watch him decide I wasn't worth keeping and be turned out all over again. Except this time it would destroy me, because this time I would have let myself love him. So I ran. Down the wet road, away from the camp, away from the king, away from the most frightening word in the world, the way I always ran, the way I'd run my whole life. And then I heard hoofbeats behind me. I turned, and there he was, Caspian the Alpha King on a horse, alone, riding hard down the road after me through the gray dawn. His hair wild, no retinue, no crown, no guards, just a man who'd woken to find me gone and come after me. And I want you to understand what that did to me, because it broke something open that 20 years of careful leaving had sealed shut. Because here's the thing at the very bottom of my wound, the thing even I hadn't fully understood until I saw him riding down that road. It was not really that people leave you. It was that no one ever comes after you. When I was given up as a child, turned out sent away, no one chased the cart. No one ran after the child being taken from her home, calling her back, deciding she was worth keeping after all. They let me go. Everyone my whole life had always just let me go. I had tested it over the years without ever admitting to myself that I was testing it. Every time I'd slipped out of a town in the night, every time I'd left a person who'd started to care, some buried part of me had listened the next morning for hoofbeats, for footsteps, for someone calling my name down the road. And there had never, ever been any. I'd leave, and the world would simply close over the space where I'd been smooth as water, as if I'd never been there at all. And each time it confirmed the thing I most feared and most believed, that I was eminently leavable, forgettable. The kind of person you let go without a second thought, because keeping her was never worth the trouble of chasing. I had become a leaver, I realized, watching a king ride after me, not only to leave before I could be left, but because somewhere deep down I was certain, bone certain, that no one would ever think I was worth coming after. That I could walk out of any room, any town, any life, and no one would chase me because I was the thing, not worth keeping, the mouth too many, the child you let the cart take away. I left first because being left was unbearable, but also because I could not survive the proof one more time that no one would ever choose to keep me. So I never gave anyone the chance. I was always gone before they could fail to come after me. And now an Alpha King had left his camp, his retinue, his duty, his crown, and ridden alone into a gray dawn down a wet road after me. Because I was worth coming after. To him, I was worth chasing. Of all the things I had braced my whole life against, this was the one I had no armor for at all. Not cruelty, not rejection, not abandonment, but pursuit. The sight of someone deciding I was worth the trouble of the chase. It undid 20 years of certainty in the space of 100 yards of muddy road. He reined up in front of me and swung down and stood there breathing hard in the dawn, and he didn't grab me, didn't command me, didn't drag me back. He just looked at me and said, "You ran." "I always run," I whispered. I was shaking and not from the cold. "It's what I do. I leave before I can be left. I'm sorry. I can't. Caspian, I don't know how to—" "I know," he said. "I understand now. I lay awake half the night after you told me about the key, and I understood. You leave first because you were left once, and you decided never to be at anyone's mercy again." He took a step closer. "But you got one thing wrong, Senna. You've been so certain your whole life that you're not worth keeping, that no one would ever come after you. And I need you to look at where you're standing." His voice cracked. "I came after you. I will always come after you. You are the most worth coming after thing that has ever fallen through my door. So you got it wrong. You're not the mouth too many. You're not the thing not worth keeping. You never were. You were just never given to the one person who'd have chased the cart. And the wall, the 20-year wall, the leave. Before you're left, no one will ever come after you. Wall cracked straight down the middle because a king had just done the one thing no one in my whole life had ever done. He'd come after me. We stood on the wet road in the gray dawn, the king and the lever, and I was crying. Actually crying, something I almost never let myself do, and Caspian closed the last of the distance and took my face in his hands gently, the way you hold something you've decided is precious. But I'm still a lever. I managed the last of the fear fighting its way out. Even if you came after me, even if I'm worth chasing, I don't know how to stay Caspian. You're a king, rooted to a throne, to a place, to a whole life. And belonging to a place is the thing I can't survive. If I stay, if I let myself belong to you, to your court, your crown, then one day you'll have the power to turn me out the way I was turned out, and I'll have let myself love you and it will destroy me. I can't be caged, even in a cage made of love, especially in a cage made of love. I'd rather wander free and alone forever than be kept somewhere I could one day be unkept. And the king, the rooted man, the one who'd never been free, gave me the only answer that could have reached me, and it was the answer I never saw coming. "Then I won't cage you," he said simply. "Senna, listen to me, because I finally understand what you need, and it's not what I first offered. I said stay last night, and you heard it the way a bird hears a cage door, and you were right to, because stay meant belong to me, be kept by me, and live forever at the mercy of my keeping. And a woman who was unkept once can't live that way. I see it now." He brushed the tears from my face. "So here's what I'm offering instead. Not a cage, a home with the door always open, a place that's yours truly, yours not held at my pleasure, not something I can turn you out of yours, and a door you are free to walk out of. Any day you like, onto any road in the world, for as long as you want, whenever you want, no permission, no question. You will never be kept. You will never be caged. You will be free as you are right now on this road, except that you'll have for the first time in your life somewhere to come back to." He went on, and I could hear him working it out as he spoke, a rooted man reaching to understand a rootless woman and getting there. "I think your whole life people have offered you the wrong thing and called it love. They offered you keeping, stay, belong to me, be mine, and they never understood that to you, being kept is just being one decision away from being unkept, that a held thing can always be dropped. So you ran from all of it because all of it was a cage with a friendly face." His gray eyes held mine. "I don't want to keep you, Senna. I want to be kept by you to be the place you choose again and again freely, because you want to, and not because you can't get out. There's a difference, and it's the whole difference. A bird in a cage and a bird that flies back to the same window every evening look almost the same from the outside. But one of them is a prisoner, and the other one is home. And the only thing that makes the difference is whether the window was ever locked. I will never lock the window. Fly wherever you like. I just want to be the window you come back to. And here is my vow, the one that matters." His voice cracked. "No matter how many times you leave, and you will because it's in you, and I would never try to take it out of you, I will be here when you come back. The door will be open. And every single time you go, if you're gone too long, I will come after you down whatever road you've taken, the way I came after you this morning, not to drag you home, but to remind you that you're worth chasing, that someone wants you back, that you will never again be the cart no one runs after. You can leave 1,000 times, Senna. I will come after you 1,000 times. The leaving was never the problem. The problem was that no one ever made the staying safe. So let me. A home you're free to leave. A man who'll always come after you. The one kind of belonging a leaver can survive, the kind you can walk away from that will never, ever turn you out and will always, always want you back. And the wall came down all the way for good because he had solved the unsolvable thing. The thing I'd been certain had no solution. He'd offered me belonging without the trap, a home without a cage, a place to stay that I was completely free to leave. And the terrible logic that had run my whole life to stay is to risk being unkept, simply dissolved, because you cannot be turned out of a home you're always free to walk out of, and you cannot be abandoned by a man who promises to come after you every single time. I reached up slowly, and I lifted the cord from around my neck, the brass key, the key to the lost home, the key I'd carried on every road for 20 years and never once been able to throw away, and I held it in my open palm between us. "This is the only home I ever had," I said, my voice breaking, "and it taught me that home is a thing that can give you up. I've carried it 20 years to remind myself never to belong anywhere again." I closed my hand around it. "I'm not going to throw it away. It's part of me, the road, the leaving, the child who was given up. But," I looked at him, "I think I'm ready to carry a second key, one to a door that won't ever turn me out, one I'm free to walk through and free to walk out of, and that will still be there open when I come back." The tears came again, but they were different now. "Will you really come after me every time, even when I run for no reason, even when it's just the old fear, even 1,000 times? 1,000 times, Caspian said, and then 1,000 more. "You're not the cart no one chases, Senna. Not anymore. Not ever again. You have my word as a king and my word as the man who rode into a gray dawn after a woman who only knows how to leave because she was worth every mile." I stayed. Not that morning, not all at once. Old shapes don't undo in a single dawn, and I think he understood that better than I did. But I went back with him that day to the camp, and then to the gathering, and then eventually to a home, a real one, a place that was mine with a door I was told and shown again and again that I was always free to walk out of. And I did walk out of it in those first years more than once. The old fear rising the road, calling the lever's panic, taking me, and every single time Caspian came after me. Down the road into the towns, wherever I'd run, never to drag me back, always to remind me you're worth chasing. Come home when you're ready. The door is open. The first time I left, really left weeks into our life together, gone in the night, with my pack, like the old days, I made it 2 days down the road before I heard the hoofbeats, and I stood there in the middle of the road and wept because part of me had left precisely to find out whether he meant it, whether the window was really unlocked, whether anyone would really come, the same wretched test I'd run on every person who'd ever started to matter. And this time, for the first time in my life, the answer came galloping down the road with my name in its mouth. He didn't scold me. He didn't ask me to promise never to do it again. He just said, "There you are, ready to come home, or do you need a few more days either way?" And something in me that had been clenched tight for 20 years began finally to unclench, because a door you can test as many times as you like and find open every time eventually stops being a door you need to flee. The leaving wore itself out, season by season, not because he caged it, but because he never did, until one year I realized I hadn't bolted in a long while, and that the road, when I traveled, it now was just a road I loved, and not an escape I needed, and that I came home from it every time, not because I had to, but because home at last was a thing I wanted to come back to. And every time he came after me, the wall wore down a little more, the old certainty that no one would ever keep me cracked a little wider. Until one day I realized I'd stopped running, not because I'd been caged, but because for the first time in my life, I'd found a place I didn't need to flee, because it would never turn me out, and a man who would never let me be the cart no one chases. He gave me a key, a real one to our home, and I hung it on the cord beside the old brass one, the lost home, and the found one, the door that gave me up, and the door that never would carried together against my heart on every road I still sometimes wander, because I am still and always will be a little bit a woman of the roads. Caspian would not have it any other way. I didn't fall in love with a woman in a cage, he says. I fell in love with the free thing the storm blew through my door. Go where you like. I'll be here. I'll always come after you. And so I wear 2 keys now, and they have taught me the whole truth of my life between them, that the first home could give me up, because I had no power in it, no choice, no door of my own, and that the second one never can, because its door was mine from the first day. And a home you hold the key to, a home you're free to leave, is the one home in all the world that can never turn you out. She took shelter from the storm in the wrong tent, and the Alpha King wouldn't let her leave. But it was never really about the tent or even the storm. It was that a woman who had spent her whole life leaving certain she was the thing not worth keeping, the child no one chased, finally met the one person who would not let her go without a fight, who chased the cart down every road, who built her a home. She was free to flee and promised to come after her every time she did. I was a leaver. I had never once stayed. And in the end, I stayed, not because a door was locked behind me, but because, for the first time in my life, a door was open in front of me, and a man stood in it who would never, ever turn me out, and would always, always come after me if I ran. That's the only kind of home a leaver can stay in, the kind she's free to leave. And the miracle of my life is that the wrong tent in a killing storm turned out to hold exactly that, and the king inside it loved me too much to let me wander off and never learn it. I think about it sometimes on the rare nights the wind picks up and the old itch to run stirs in me, how a single wrong turn in the dark, one tent flap out of 100, set down a lever in front of the one man on earth who would chase her. The storm meant to kill me. Instead, it blew me home. I've stopped believing in luck mostly, but I believe in that storm, and I believe in the man who would not let me leave it.